Welcome, friend. I'm Jack, host of the channel, and today we're diving into another episode. Pour yourself a drink and get comfortable, because I've got a powerful story coming your way. If something hits deep, drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's get into it.
Jake Robinson sat on the couch, looking at his phone. A few weeks ago, he had received a disturbing call from Laura, his wife of almost 9 years. That afternoon, her PI told him she and her lover had just boarded a flight to Miami. He knew they planned to spend the weekend there, even though she had told him something different. It was just the latest in a long line of lies and bad decisions on her part. He wondered how he could have been so stupid and blind. For nearly 9 years, he had given everything to build a life with Laura, but that was all gone now. He took another sip of his coffee and sat back in his chair. Closing his eyes, he thought about the last decade. He had met Laura in college 11 years ago. They were both working towards a business degree and were part of the same study group. That led to them dating, eventually falling in love, and getting married after graduation. He went to work for his uncle, who owned a chain of successful auto shops across the state. He had always worked for his uncle, spending his summers in one of the many stores. Sometimes he worked in the shop replacing tires and brakes. Other times he worked as a runner, driving tires and parts to some of the local shops. As a result, he learned a lot about the business. After college, his uncle talked him into working for him at the corporate headquarters in the accounting department. Over the years, Jake proved himself more than capable of handling whatever needed to be done and was now in charge of the accounting department, working directly for Tom Andrews, the CFO, who was set to retire in a couple of years. Jake knew that it was his uncle's dream to hand the company over to him when he retired. He also knew that when Tom retired, he would be promoted to take over his position. Meanwhile, Laura had taken a job as a realtor after they married. She went to school and got her license to sell real estate. She was darn good at her job and made pretty good money, even during leaner years when the market wasn't doing well. They had a good life, or so he thought. They scrimped and saved and were able to buy a nice house in the suburbs. They each drove a nice, fairly new car, and to all outside appearances, had a secure marriage. They didn't have any children, something which bothered him more than it bothered her. Right now, he thought that was something of a blessing in disguise. Early on, Laura had said there was something wrong with her tubes, so she had them tied. He consoled her and suggested they look into adoption, but Laura dismissed the idea. Eventually, he accepted the notion that they would never have any children. But several things had happened over the last year that made him think something was going on, something that would forever change his relationship with Laura. For starters, Laura began spending more time with the girls than ever before. He never begrudged her some time out, as he knew how stressful her job was. But the once-a-month happy hour that used to last until 8 p.m. became a 2 or 3 night a week event. Depending on the day, she might not get home until midnight or later. Jake wasn't happy about it and expressed his displeasure, but she waved him off, saying she was under a lot of stress at work and deserved time to blow off some steam. "So, what are you doing until midnight?" he asked her one night when she got home, her hair disheveled and her clothes smelling like cigarette smoke. "Oh, we just had a few drinks. Sometimes we might dance if the mood hits us. Look, Jake, it's none of your concern. I'm a big girl, and I don't need you telling me what to do. So lay off, okay?" Jake looked at her, shocked. She had never spoken to him like this before. She saw the look on his face and softened up. "I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't mean to go off on you. It's just that we're under a lot of pressure with the market the way it is. You've worked through tough times in the market before, and it didn't bother you. What's different about this time? You have no idea how hard it is sometimes. The competition is getting worse and worse, and the higher-ups are putting more pressure on us to sell property." "I understand that, dear," he told her. "But you don't need to take it out on me. I'm on your side, remember?" She smiled and wrapped her arms around him. "You're right, dear. Please accept my apology." "All right, I accept, but please take a shower or something. No offense, but you smell like an ashtray." "Sorry, there were a lot of people smoking at the club. I'll go take a shower." He laid down and was asleep by the time she made it to bed. The next few months saw other changes as well. The frequency of their sex dropped dramatically. Before this started, they used to make love 3 or 4 times a week. That dropped to twice a week and eventually fell off to about once every 2 weeks if he was lucky. Even worse, her attitude toward him seemed to change. Before, she always asked about his work and took an interest in his hobbies. Now, it seemed that she could care less about what he had to say. Then, there was the day he caught her in a blatant lie. One day, he decided to drop by her office to take her out to lunch. When he got there, however, he was told she was out showing some property. That night, after Laura got home from whatever she was doing with the girls, he asked about her day. "I was in the office all day today," she said. "I had a lot of paperwork to catch up on, so I just grabbed a sandwich out of the vending machine." Jake was shocked. She had just lied to him with a straight face. As far as he knew, this was the first time she had ever done that. He thought about pressing her on it, but chose not to. In her frame of mind, she would probably blow a gasket, and he was simply too tired to deal with that. He began to wonder, though, how many other times she had lied to him. Later that night, as they lay in bed, he rolled over and looked at her. She saw the concern on his face. "What's wrong, Jake?" she asked. "I'm concerned," he said. "About what?" "Us. I feel like we're drifting apart from each other. Do you still love me?" "Of course I do, honey," she said, putting an arm around him. "You know that, don't you?" "Honestly, I don't know. I can't remember the last time you told me, and it's been a while since we've had sex. It seems like you're gone more than you're home. I'm sorry, it's just the pressure from the job. I do love you, please believe me." "Can you start showing me a little more?" he asked. "Of course, baby," she said, kissing his face. They made love that night, and Jake felt better, but he still had concerns. Things went back to normal for a month or so, but the same pattern began to emerge again. What the hell is going on? He asked himself for the umpteenth time. It started to become clear to him what was going on the day his longtime friend, Dave Cooper, called him, asking if he could get away for a bit. "Sure, I can meet you for a beer." "What's going on?" Jake asked. "I really can't say over the phone, Jake, but it's important." "Okay, I'll meet you there at 6 if that works." They ended the call, and Jake met Dave at the bar that evening. Jake wasn't too worried about being late, as Laura was almost always gone until 7 or 8 p.m., sometimes later. "Okay, bud," Jake said as they sipped their beer. "Spill it. What's going on?" "Jake, I saw your wife today while I was out doing my runs." "Yeah, she sells real estate, probably out showing some property, I'm sure. But I never knew selling real estate involved kissing and hand-holding." "What? Come on, you're pulling my leg." "I wish I was, buddy. I was going down River Street, and I saw your wife coming out of a house with a man. They were holding hands, and then they kissed. I'm not talking about a smack on the cheek either. He had his hands all over her hips at the same time." "That can't be. Are you sure you're talking about my Laura?" Dave pulled out his cell phone and showed Jake a picture. Sure enough, it was Laura, kissing a man who had his hands all over her backside. Jake stared quietly as he handed the phone back. "Can you email me that picture?" "Sure," Dave said, hitting some buttons on his phone. "So what are you going to do?" Jake shook his head. "I don't know, buddy. Things have been off for a while now, but I would never have thought she'd do something like this. A friend of mine is a private investigator. If you want, I can put you in touch with him." "Do that. I need to know what the hell is going on." They said their goodbyes and headed out the door. Laura was in the kitchen when he got home. This was something new, he thought to himself. "You're home early," he said, giving her a kiss. "I'm not complaining, by the way." She smiled and kissed him back. "Where were you?" she asked. "I was down having a beer with Dave. I wasn't expecting you home so early, so I figured what the heck." "Everything okay with your friend?" she asked. "Not really. He just learned that the wife of a friend of his is running around on her husband." "Oh," she replied, her face falling just a little. Jake thought he saw her flinch. "Well, maybe he's reading too much into it. I don't know. I'm just glad I don't have that problem," Jake said, watching her carefully. Again, he thought she flinched slightly at his remark. "It would kill me if you ever did anything like that to me." "I'd never do anything like that to you," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "I love you too much." "I'm glad to hear you say that," he told her, kissing her pretty face. "So why are you home so early?" "Well, our annual company convention is coming up this weekend, so I thought I'd start packing. I wanted to spend the next night or two with you since we'll be apart for a few days, she said. It's in Chicago this year. Where at? He asked. Oh, over at the convention center. We're all staying at the Grand Hotel. I hear it's a 4-star hotel. When are you leaving? He asked. Friday afternoon, right after lunch, she said. That was the day after tomorrow. You getting another award this year? He asked. She always received awards for being the top seller in the region. Probably, she said. They shared another kiss. Well then, why don't I take you upstairs and congratulate you for another successful year? She smiled and took him by the hand. I thought you'd never ask, she said. They spent the evening making love, but Jake had other things on his mind. Would she cheat on him over the weekend? He wondered. Say, I have some vacation time coming up. Why don't I take a few days and come with you? Maybe we can spend the week in Chicago and unwind a bit, reconnect. Our 10th anniversary is coming up next week, you know. That sounds like fun, but I'll be so busy with seminars and meetings, I don't think we'd hardly ever see each other. Besides, they're expecting me to get right back to work after the convention. Listen, why don't we celebrate our anniversary when I get back? I'll make it up to you, I promise. Okay, I'm going to hold you to that. The next day, he contacted Dave and got the name and number of the private investigator. He arranged a meeting for that day and drove over before lunch. Good morning, Mr. Robinson, the middle-aged man said as Jake entered his cluttered office. Good to meet you. Dave said you might be calling. Please, call me Mark. What can I do for you? Jake explained the situation and told him about Laura's upcoming trip to Chicago. Chicago, huh? You think she intends to hook up with someone at the convention? I don't know. It's possible. Well, I have contacts out there who owe me a favor or two. Tell you what, we'll put eyes on her there. If you want, we can sneak in a camera and a microphone. If you get me her room number, it'll cost extra, you know. I figured that, but I need to know the truth. Mark pulled out a digital audio recorder and handed it to him. This is really simple to use. It's voice-activated, so all you have to do is slip it under her car seat and turn it on. You can retrieve it later after she's left. I'm assuming she'll be leaving her car at the airport? She usually does, Jake said. Good. Don't worry, we've got it all covered. If she is messing around, we'll find out. By the way, here's my private number in case you hear anything. Call me anytime. Thanks, Jake said, writing a check from his personal account instead of the joint account. Both he and Laura had their own personal accounts separate from the joint checking account used to pay the bills. They had each agreed on this years ago, promising to deposit no more than 10% of their net earnings. Until now, Jake had used his for clothes, incidentals, and presents for Laura. He had been saving for a cruise, but was now using it for something else. That night, Laura finished packing for her trip. Jake offered to carry her bags to the car, an offer she gladly accepted. That would be such a big help, she said, giving him a kiss. He carried the bags to her car, placing them in the trunk. He couldn't help but notice how much she packed. It was certainly more than enough for a weekend. As he put her overnight bag in the trunk, he couldn't resist the urge to see what she had taken, so he opened the case. He spotted the container holding her birth control pills right off the bat. Only 10 were left in the container. What the hell, he asked himself. Why does she have birth control pills? Didn't she say she had her tubes tied, or was that another lie? He glanced at the clothes she packed. Some seemed appropriate for a business meeting, but much of it appeared to be clubwear, tiny dresses he had never seen before, and frilly underwear. He also noticed a couple of very skimpy bikinis, one of which appeared to be an open-sling micro-bikini, something he had only seen on the internet. What the hell kind of meeting is this? He asked himself. He pulled out his phone and took pictures. Opening her car door, he slipped the audio recorder under her seat and made sure it was turned on. Then he closed the car doors and made sure everything was locked up. They made love that night, perhaps, Jake thought, for the last time as husband and wife. Laura gave him her room number the next morning at breakfast and promised to call every night. I love you, she told him as she kissed him on the cheek. I love you too. He watched as she pulled out and drove off. When he got to work, he called Mark and gave him her room number. Great, thanks. I'll get my guys on it right away. That afternoon, he got a call from Laura, letting him know she was at the airport and getting ready to take off. "I'll call you when I get checked into my room," she said. "I'd appreciate that. Remember, I love you." "I love you too, baby. I'll miss you." "Sure you will," he thought to himself sarcastically. "He'll miss you too," he said instead as he ended the call. He looked up to see his uncle standing in the doorway. "Everything okay, son? You look like your dog just died." "I don't know, Dad," Jake said. His uncle came into the office and closed the door. "Everything okay at home? You want to talk about it?" his uncle asked. Jake knew better than to try to keep anything from his uncle, so he told him everything he knew so far. "That doesn't sound too good, son. I never would have suspected her of cheating on you." "Me neither, Dad," Jake said. "Well, listen, if there's anything your mom or I can do, let me know," the older man said. "We're here for you." "Thanks, Dad, I appreciate that." Jake took off a couple of hours early and drove to the airport looking for Laura's car. He found it in the short-term parking and retrieved the audio recorder. Looking around, he noticed the rest of the car was neat as a pin, the way she always kept it. On the way home, he got a call from Laura. "Hi, baby, just wanted to let you know I got here okay." "Thanks for letting me know," he said. "I'm just getting settled in. I'll call you later tonight. Love you." "Love you too," he said. After he got home, he turned on the audio recorder. He hoped there would be nothing on it, and for the most part, there wasn't. Just road noise and the sound of her radio. But about halfway through the recording, he heard his marriage go down the toilet. He could hear her phone ringing, and since it was connected to her car through Bluetooth and worked through her speakers, he could hear both sides of the conversation. "Hey, baby," he heard a man's voice say. "Hey yourself, Stud Muffin," she said. "Stud Muffin?" Jake asked himself. "Who the hell is this clown?" "I can't wait to see you again. Last week was fantastic." "I'm glad you approve," she said with a giggle. "Are we set for next week?" "Next week?" Jake asked himself, shocked. "Got it all taken care of. Did you tell your husband?" "Not yet. Don't worry, sweetie. I've got it all under control." "He doesn't suspect anything, does he?" the man asked. "Not a thing. He's clueless as ever." "I hope you're right," he said. "I told you, don't worry. He'll believe whatever I tell him." "Good," the man said. "Listen, I'm about ready to pull into the airport. I'll see you at the hotel tonight, okay?" "I can't wait. Bye, lover." "Bye-bye," she said, ending the call. Jake stared at the recorder, unable to believe what he had just heard. He played it again, just to make sure he wasn't misinterpreting anything. Not only was she cheating on him, but she had something planned for next week, the week of their 10th anniversary, and it didn't include him. Damn, 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 he thought to himself. How long has this been going on? And who the hell is this pig she's screwing? He grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and sat at his desk, replaying the last few months in his mind. Had he really been so clueless that he missed all the signs? He wondered what else she might be hiding. Up until now, he had always respected her privacy and stayed out of her personal things, but that was now off the table. He knew she kept her home desk locked, but also knew where she kept the key. He went to their bedroom and opened a small drawer in her jewelry box. Sure enough, there was the key to her desk on a ring with a couple of other keys. He grabbed the ring and went into the bedroom they had set up as her office. Opening the desk, he started looking through her files. Ordinarily, he would never have done this, but after her betrayal, she no longer deserved any consideration. What he found shocked him to the core. It seemed Laura had been lying to him throughout their entire marriage. He pulled out a folder she used for her banking records and was shocked to see how much she had socked away out of her pay. He knew how much she deposited in their joint account and was stunned to discover that she had deposited much more than the agreed-upon 10% into her private account, which now had over $150,000. Looking through her purchases over the last few months, he saw that she had bought an expensive Rolex watch and other gifts, no doubt for her lover, since she had never given him anything that extravagant. She had also purchased a lot of expensive clothing online, including some risque items from Victoria's Secret. Of course, he hadn't seen any of it. But there was more, much more. He also found medical bills for a family planning clinic. Apparently, Laura had been able to get pregnant twice in the last 2 years and had gone in for an abortion both times. She paid cash out of her own account. He wondered if either or both of the children she aborted were really his. He also saw that she had been paying for birth control pills regularly for at least the last 4 years. Worse yet, he found a receipt for Plan B, morning after pills. According to the date on the receipt, Laura had purchased them earlier this week. And then there was the kicker. Among her receipts was a fairly recent one for a hefty down payment on a condo in a wealthy part of town. Is this to be her love nest, he wondered, or part of her exit strategy from the marriage? There were also receipts for utilities and new furniture. He looked at the key ring he found earlier and wondered if one of them was for her condo. He intended to find out. He turned on her computer, knowing she always wrote her passwords down. Sure enough, he found a piece of paper taped to the bottom of her keyboard with a list of usernames and passwords. He tried the first one, and the computer came right up. Opening her browser, he found a link to an online email program and went in. The email client opened instantly, revealing her inbox. Apparently, she was so confident he would never snoop on her that she had kept the username and password cached on the system. He began scanning her emails, and what he found shocked him even more. There were a number of emails to and from someone named Greg Harrison. Almost all were explicit, with Greg commenting on how much he loved having sex with Laura. Her responses were just as enthusiastic. He noticed the emails went back almost a full year, around the time he first started noticing changes in her. From what he could gather, their trysts initially took place in hotel rooms, but they later started meeting up at homes she was selling. One email, dated about 6 months ago, partially answered one of his questions. "Did you take care of that little problem?" Greg asked. "Yes, I went down and had the abortion today. Too bad you didn't keep it. You could have passed it off as Jake's." "I couldn't do that. As far as he knows, I can't have any children. He would know it wasn't his." Jake's blood boiled as he read through the emails. 6 months ago, that was around the time he first caught her lying. He kept going through the emails. At one point, Greg suggested they have sex in Laura's marital bed, but she put her foot down on that. "I will not do that to Jake," she told him in one email. "Come on, the stupid cuck has no idea what's going on," Greg wrote. "No," she wrote back. "I'm not going to do that." "Well, what if you had a place of your own? You could pay cash on a nice condo with the commissions you make, and your husband would never know the difference." "You may be onto something there," Laura replied. "I do have my own account, and Jake never asks about it. Let me see what's available." That email was dated 3 months ago. The receipt for the down payment on the condo was just over a month old. "I got a condo," she wrote in another email. "I just made the down payment, and I have new furniture coming in about a week. Jake doesn't know anything about it." "Excellent. We'll have to christen every room in the place." Jake sat back in shock. He continued to scroll through the emails. "So why do you stay with your husband? Why not just leave him and move into the condo?" Greg asked in another email. "Believe it or not, I still have feelings for him. He may be a stodgy accountant for a chain of tire stores, but I like him, and he's good to me. I only got the condo so we'd have a place to hook up without having to risk being seen at a hotel. Besides, you're still married. Listen, babe, say the word, and I'll dump Christy in a heartbeat. She's a royal pain in the ass anyway." "We'll see what happens after the conference," Laura replied. Jake began printing out her emails and copying the receipts he found. Just then, the phone rang. It was Laura's number. "Hello," he said, answering the call. "It's me, babe. Are you all right? You sound out of sorts." "I've got a splitting headache," he lied, not wanting to let her know he was on to her. "Well, I just wanted to let you know I'm settling down for the night. You take something for that headache and get some rest. I love you and miss you," she said. "Yeah, me too." He ended the call, wondering if she noticed that he didn't specifically say he loved or missed her. Truth was, he was close to punching a hole in the wall. He decided to find out who this Greg character was, so he began looking on the website for the company Laura worked for. Sure enough, he found him, Greg Harrison, the regional manager for the real estate company Laura worked for. "She's screwing her boss," he muttered, printing the page out and adding it to his stack of evidence. Unable to rest, Jake decided to check out Laura's secret condo. He verified the address, but wondered if she had a security system set up. Looking through her paperwork, he found a series of numbers scribbled next to the word alarm. Of course she would write it down, Jake thought to himself. She writes everything down. After turning off her computer, he grabbed a pair of latex gloves from the garage. He didn't want to leave any evidence behind. He found the complex easily and parked in the spot assigned to Laura. Walking to the door, he slipped on the gloves and tried one of the keys from her key ring. Sure enough, the door unlocked, and he stepped inside. He saw the alarm system console on the wall next to the door and entered the code. A beep confirmed the alarm was off. Jake turned on a light and looked around the condo. Laura had good taste, he thought, admiring the furnishings. Too bad she wasn't as loyal as she was stylish. There were no pictures of them together, which didn't surprise him. After all, this was her love nest, a place to escape their marriage. In the kitchen, he noticed she had even brought a few dishes and silverware. There wasn't much food in the refrigerator, and the pantry was almost bare. Jake looked around, impressed at how fully furnished the place was, complete with tasteful wall art and a large flat-screen TV. He wandered into the master bedroom and noted that it, too, was well furnished. Lacy curtains, the kind Laura loved, hung over the windows. Looking down, he noticed the curtains hung right over an electric baseboard heater. He shook his head, wondering if she had even considered the fire hazard. Opening the dresser drawers, Jake found lingerie he had never seen before, along with men's underwear, which he assumed belonged to Greg. He also discovered an assortment of sex toys. He pulled out his phone and took pictures of everything. Inside the nightstand drawer, he found a card addressed to Laura. It was from Greg, thanking her for the Rolex watch and mentioning how much he looked forward to their housewarming. The card was signed, "Love, Greg." Jake felt like ripping the card apart but held back. He continued taking photos instead. The closet was filled with more clothes, both men's and women's. In the master bathroom, Jake spotted 2 toothbrushes hanging over the sink and a set of monogrammed towels next to the shower. He snapped more pictures. The second bedroom was mostly empty except for a small desk and chair. There was a network cable on the desk, suggesting she used it for her laptop. A few pieces of mail, all addressed to Laura and from utility companies, lay on the table. He took pictures of these too, making sure the names and addresses were clearly visible. Before leaving, Jake noticed the long, lacy curtains in both bedrooms were draped over the baseboard heaters, which concerned him even more. He also saw there were no smoke detectors in the bedrooms, and the one in the kitchen looked very old. He wondered if it even had a battery. After ensuring everything was just as he had found it, Jake reactivated the security system, locked the door, and left. As he drove home, he thought about his next move. Divorce was a given, but he wasn't going to stop there. He wanted Laura and Greg to pay for what they had done. But violence wasn't an option. He wasn't about to go to jail for them. When he got home, he decided to track down Greg's wife. Using the phone book, he found a listing for Gregory Harrison and dialed the number. "Harrison Residence," a female voice answered. "Is this Mrs. Harrison?" Jake asked. "Yes, it is. To whom am I speaking?" she replied. "My name is Jake Robinson. Is your husband the regional manager for Prime Real Estate?" Jake asked. "Yes, he is, but he's gone to a conference this weekend and won't be back until next week. You'll have to call the regional office and leave a message for him there," she said, sounding confused. "Actually, Mrs. Harrison, you're the one I'd like to speak with," Jake said. "Oh," she responded, her tone shifting. "Yes, ma'am. I hate to be the one to tell you this, but my wife is having an affair with your husband," Jake said bluntly. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, I'm sure, and I can prove it," Jake replied. "You have ironclad proof?" she asked, her voice growing more serious. "I do. I can even show you where they've been meeting if you'd like," Jake offered. She sighed over the phone. "Is tomorrow okay?" "Sure, what time works best for you?" Jake asked. "Make it around 10 in the morning," she said. Jake gave her the address and directions to Laura's condo. "I'll see you there," he told her before ending the call. Smiling to himself, Jake began making a list of things to do. First on the list, change the locks on the house. He could get that done before meeting Greg's wife. That night, he considered getting drunk but decided against it. Instead, he grabbed a slice of cold pizza and pondered his options. After finishing the pizza, he trudged up the stairs to bed, feeling exhausted but determined. The next morning, Jake woke up early, grabbed the materials he needed, and drove to a local hardware store. By noon, he had replaced all the locks on the house. After a quick shower, he gathered the audio recorder and the printed emails and receipts, then headed to Laura's condo to meet Greg's wife. When he arrived, Jake spotted an attractive woman with dark hair sitting in a Toyota Corolla parked nearby. He walked up to the car and knocked on the window. She rolled it down and looked at him. "Are you Christy Harrison?" he asked. She nodded. "I am. You must be Jake Robinson." "One and the same," he said, opening her car door. "Come with me. I'll show you their love nest. You might want to put these on first, though." He handed her a pair of latex gloves. "I don't want to leave any fingerprints." "A good idea," she said, slipping on the gloves. They walked to the condo, and Jake used the key he had made to unlock the door. After deactivating the alarm system, they stepped inside. Jake led her to the master bedroom, opening the drawers and closet to reveal Greg's clothing. "Oh my God, I've been wondering where his clothes have been disappearing to," Christy said, her voice trembling. "Has your husband been wearing a Rolex watch lately?" Jake asked. She nodded. "Yes, he told me it was a gift from management." Jake shook his head and pulled out the card he had found in Laura's nightstand. He opened it and handed it to her. Christy read the note and began crying. "Is that his handwriting?" Jake asked softly. "Yes," she said, her voice cracking as tears flowed down her cheeks. "There's more," Jake said, pulling out the printed emails and the audio recorder. Christy read through the emails, her tears intensifying. When Jake played the audio from the recorder, she broke down completely. "I'm so sorry about all this," Jake said, wrapping his arms around her. He felt like crying too, but held it in. "It's not your fault. I've suspected something like this for a while, but never had any proof," she said through her sobs. After a few minutes, she composed herself and looked at Jake. "So what are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to divorce her. What about you?" "I'm kicking that lame dog out of the house as soon as I see him," she replied, her voice suddenly resolute. Then she paused and looked at Jake, her eyes lighting up. "I've got an idea," she said. "What's that?" Jake asked. "They want to live here together, right? Why don't we help them?" "Help them how?" Jake asked, intrigued. "I mean, why don't we pack up all their crap and drop it off here?" she suggested. Jake thought for a moment, then smiled. "I kind of like that idea, but we better get moving. They'll be back soon." Christy shook her head. "Greg said he'd be gone for a week after the conference. I'd bet anything Laura will find an excuse to be gone too." Jake suddenly remembered the conversation he had overheard on the audio recorder. Laura had specifically asked Greg if he had everything set for next week, but didn't mention what it was. "Damn, I think you're right," Jake said. "Still, I want to get her stuff out of my house as soon as possible." "Agreed," Christy replied. "Meet you back here in 3 hours?" "Works for me," Jake said. "I'm just going to toss her crap into trash bags, so I should be back in plenty of time." "Same here," Christy said, standing up to leave. Jake took a moment to really look at her. She was shorter than Laura, with a girl-next-door cuteness and a shapely figure. He couldn't believe Greg was cheating on her. Jake and Christy left the condo, determined to get the task done quickly. 3 hours later, they returned, each with their cars stuffed full of trash bags containing their respective spouses' belongings. They carried the bags into the condo, tossing them haphazardly into the second bedroom, not caring whether anything broke. "I don't know about you, but I wasn't exactly gentle with her stuff," Christy said, her voice laced with bitterness. Jake laughed. "Neither was I," he admitted. They high-fived and stood back, surveying the chaos they had created. After a moment, Jake glanced over at her. "I don't know about you, but I'm starving. How about we grab a burger or something?" Christy nodded. "I could really go for a thick, juicy cheeseburger right about now." Jake smiled. "I know just the place. My treat. You up for it?" She raised an eyebrow and teased. "You're not going to ply me with alcohol and take advantage of me, are you?" He laughed. "As tempting as that sounds, I wouldn't do that." "Darn," she said, winking playfully. They both laughed, feeling a sense of relief after the heavy morning. They drove to a bar Jake often visited with his buddy Dave. Christy followed him in her car, and once they parked, she looked up at the bar's neon sign. "A bar?" she asked, curious but not judgmental. "Trust me," Jake said with a grin. "They make the best burgers in town. You'll love it." Christy gave him a mock-skeptical look. "Okay, I'll trust you, but I hope this isn't a dive." Inside, they ordered burgers with fries and a couple of beers. As they ate, the conversation shifted to their failing marriages. Christy's story was similar to Jake's. She had met Greg in college, they married soon after, and while she wanted kids, Greg never did. He's always been so career-driven, Christy said. I work in accounts payable for a home improvement company, and while it's not glamorous, it's stable. He's never been the kind of guy to stay in one place for long. I think I've always known something like this would happen. Are you a CPA? Jake asked, genuinely interested. Christy shook her head. No, I never went that far, but I've thought about it, maybe someday. Jake nodded, then leaned in. You know, we're always looking for good people at the company I work for. If you get me your resume, maybe I can help you out. Christy smiled. I just might take you up on that offer, Mr. Robinson, she said, taking a bite of her burger. Just then, Jake's phone buzzed. He saw Laura's number flash on the screen and his stomach twisted. He answered the call, keeping his tone neutral. Hello? Hey, baby. Laura's voice was slightly slurred, and he could tell she had been drinking. Guess what? I got the top seller award again, she exclaimed, not waiting for him to respond. Congrats, Jake said coolly. Yeah, and they want me to stay here in Chicago next week to work with some of the agents, she added. Jake already knew it was a lie. There's even talk of me getting promoted into management soon. That's great, Laura, he replied, keeping his anger in check. What about our anniversary? It's on Wednesday, remember? I know, and I'm so sorry, she said, sounding vaguely apologetic. But maybe we can celebrate it next weekend? I'll make it up to you, I promise. Don't bother, Jake said, his voice tightening. I know your work is important to you, and I wouldn't want you to miss out on a big sale. What's that supposed to mean? Laura asked, her tone sharpening. Nothing, Jake replied, his sarcasm thinly veiled. You only get to celebrate 10 years of marriage once, but I understand how much your job means to you. Jake, Laura started, but he cut her off. I love you, she said, but Jake remained silent for a moment before replying. Yeah, me too, he said, ending the call. He set his phone down and looked across the table at Christy. Well, there it is. She's actually choosing Greg over your anniversary, Christy said, shaking her head in disbelief. She reached across the table and placed her hand on his, a gesture of genuine empathy. Jake felt a lump rise in his throat. He hadn't expected Christy to care so much, but here she was, showing more concern for him than his own wife had in months. He almost broke down but held back the tears. I'm sorry, Christy said softly. You deserve better. Don't be, Jake replied, managing a weak smile. I would have called her worse. They finished their meal and sat in silence for a moment. Then Christy looked up at him with a determined glint in her eyes. So what's next? The next morning, Christy and Jake shared breakfast in a more peaceful atmosphere. Christy had made bacon and eggs while Jake brewed fresh coffee. As they sat down to eat, Jake's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Mark. Good morning, Mark, Jake answered. Working on a Sunday? Mark chuckled. More often than I'd like, but I've got some news. Your wife and her lover boarded their flight in Chicago just before 6 a.m. They had a short layover at LAX, and now their plane's en route to Honolulu. They'll be landing in about 5 hours. Jake felt a sense of finality as Mark gave him the details. Thanks, Mark, Jake said, writing down the flight information. After ending the call, he looked at Christy. It's on. They're headed to Hawaii. Christy shook her head. Unbelievable. She actually went through with it. Jake couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of anger, sadness, and relief. He was about to say something when his phone buzzed again. This time, it was Laura. Hello, Jake answered, keeping his tone neutral again. Jake, Laura's voice was frantic. In the background, he could hear screaming and other voices shouting. There was a lot of static and noise on the line. Yes, Laura, what's going on? Jake asked, feeling his pulse quicken. No time, plane going down, so sorry, forgive me. Laura's voice cracked and the line went dead. Jake's eyes widened in shock. Christy, who had been sitting across from him, looked at him, her face pale. What happened? She asked. I think her plane is going down, Jake said, trying to process what he had just heard. He frantically tried calling Laura back, but it went straight to voicemail. Christy grabbed her phone and called Greg, but his phone also went to voicemail. Jake ran to his computer and did a quick search, finding a contact number for the airline. After a few minutes of being transferred and put on hold, he finally reached someone who confirmed they were investigating reports of a plane crash. Jake left his and Laura's details, along with Christy's information, and was told they would be contacted once there was more information. They sat in silence for a few minutes before Jake finally spoke. "Try calling Greg again." Christy tried again, but the result was the same, voicemail. "It's going straight to voicemail," she said, her voice trembling. Jake turned on the television and flipped through the news channels. A few minutes later, one of the networks broke the story. An American Airlines flight to Honolulu had crashed in the Pacific Ocean, but details were still scarce. "Oh my God," Christy whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. Jake pulled her into a tight embrace, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. He didn't want Laura to die, despite everything she had done. He hated what she had done to their marriage, but death wasn't what he wanted for her. An hour later, Jake's phone rang again. It was the airline. "Mr. Robinson?" the woman on the line asked. "This is he," Jake responded. "I'm calling to confirm that the plane your wife was on has crashed. We don't have any more information at this time, but we will contact you as soon as we learn more," she said. Jake thanked her and ended the call, then turned to Christy. They hugged each other, sharing tears for their spouses, despite the betrayal. Over the next few days, the news trickled in slowly. Christy and Jake learned that there were no survivors from the crash. The freighter that had been nearby had recovered a few bodies, but neither Laura's nor Greg's remains were among them. Jake's mind raced as he tried to process it all. He hated Laura for her infidelity, but he never wanted this. He found himself vacillating between anger and grief, unsure how to feel. Part of him was relieved. There would be no need for a messy divorce, no fighting over assets. But another part of him felt hollow, knowing that his last interaction with Laura had been one of lies and betrayal. Christy, meanwhile, seemed to share many of Jake's conflicting emotions. Though she didn't shed many tears for Greg, she expressed sorrow for the situation. Both of them were left to sort through the aftermath of their failed marriages, now cut short by tragedy. Then, one afternoon as they sat together reflecting on everything, Jake had an idea. He turned to Christy. "Why don't you move in with me?" he asked softly. Christy looked at him, her eyes filled with surprise. "You mean that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes," Jake said. "I have an extra bedroom upstairs, and I think it would be good for both of us. We've got a lot to deal with over the next few months. Maybe we can help each other through it." Christy thought for a moment, then smiled. "Why not? But only on one condition." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Let me sleep with you," she said softly but seriously. Jake was taken aback. This was moving much faster than he had expected, and he wondered if it was wise. But then he set those thoughts aside. He had thrown caution to the wind before. Why stop now? "I'd like that," he replied quietly. Christy smiled, her eyes brimming with emotion. "It's been so long since I've felt this kind of comfort," she said. "Last night was the first time I've felt at peace in ages." Jake nodded, feeling the same. "You're welcome to stay as long as you want." Christy leaned over and kissed his cheek, then whispered, "Thank you, Jake." After she left to gather her things, Jake sat alone for a while, processing everything. His life had taken such a dramatic turn in just a few days, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. Later that afternoon, Christy returned to Jake's house, her car filled with her belongings. It didn't take long for her to move in, as she only brought the essentials. The rest of her things, she said, could be dealt with in the coming weeks. As she unpacked, Jake couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. It was surreal. Barely a week ago, his world had been flipped upside down, and now here he was, sharing his home with another woman, one who had gone through a similar betrayal. It wasn't how he had ever imagined his life turning out, but oddly enough, it felt right. That evening, as they sat on the couch watching television, Christy turned to Jake. "Thank you for letting me stay here," she said softly. "It feels nice, being with someone who understands." Jake smiled. "You don't need to thank me. I'm glad you're here. We both need someone right now." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "It's strange, isn't it? How quickly life changes. Just a few days ago, I thought I'd be spending the rest of my life with Greg, and now I can't even think about him without feeling sick." Jake nodded. "I know what you mean. I never would have thought Laura would do something like this, but now that she's gone..." He trailed off, struggling to find the right words. "I'm just trying to figure out what's next." Christy looked up at him, her eyes full of sympathy. We'll figure it out together, she said, squeezing his hand. I'm not going anywhere. Jake smiled, feeling more at ease than he had in a long time. They watched TV in comfortable silence, the weight of the past few days finally beginning to lift. Christy fell asleep on his shoulder, and Jake gently shifted her so she could lie down on the couch, covering her with a blanket. As he stood in the dimly lit room, looking down at her peaceful face, he realized something profound. His life was starting over, and maybe, just maybe, it would be better this time around. In the weeks that followed, Jake and Christy settled into a routine. Christy sold her house and officially moved in with Jake. They replaced the furniture and redecorated the house, making it a place that was truly theirs, free of the memories of their cheating spouses. They also began the long and grueling process of dealing with the legal aftermath of Laura and Greg's deaths. There were insurance claims to file, bank accounts to close, and endless paperwork to handle. The condo that Laura had secretly bought was sold, and Jake was relieved to recoup some of the money she had hidden from him over the years. One day, as they were going through some of Laura's old paperwork, Christy found something that caught her eye. "Jake, look at this," she said, holding up a receipt. He glanced over at the paper and froze. It was a receipt for an abortion, dated about 6 months ago. Jake felt his stomach churn. Laura had told him she couldn't get pregnant, that she'd had her tubes tied, but now it was clear that had been another one of her lies. "She was pregnant," Jake whispered, feeling the weight of the betrayal sink even deeper. "And she didn't tell me." Christy placed a comforting hand on his arm. "It wasn't your fault, Jake. She was hiding so much from you. This is just another thing." Jake nodded, but the knowledge stung. He wasn't sure if the child had been his or Greg's, but either way, it didn't matter now. Laura had taken the decision away from him, just as she had taken everything else. He took a deep breath and shook his head, pushing the thought aside. "We need to keep moving forward," he said, trying to focus on the present. "There's no use dwelling on what she did." Christy nodded in agreement. "We're better off without them." 3 months passed, and in that time, Jake and Christy grew closer. They shared more about their lives, their hopes, and their dreams. What had started as mutual support blossomed into something deeper. They weren't just roommates or friends anymore. They had become each other's strength. One night, as they sat at their favorite restaurant, Jake couldn't hold back any longer. He got down on one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. Christy's eyes widened in surprise. "Christy," he began, his voice trembling with emotion. "These past few months have been the hardest of my life, but you've made them bearable. You've brought light into a very dark time, and I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Christy's eyes as she looked down at him. "Yes, Jake," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. "Yes, of course, I'll marry you." The restaurant erupted in applause, and Jake slipped the ring onto Christy's finger, his heart swelling with happiness. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything seemed right in the world. As they embraced, Christy leaned in and whispered in his ear, "There's something else I need to tell you." Jake pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. "What is it?" he asked. Christy smiled, her face glowing with joy. "I'm pregnant." Jake's heart nearly stopped. "You're pregnant?" Christy nodded, her smile widening. "We're gonna have a baby, Jake." Overwhelmed with emotion, Jake pulled her close, kissing her deeply. "I love you so much," he whispered against her lips. "I love you more," she replied, resting her forehead against his. "Just one favor, though." "Anything," Jake said, still in awe of the moment. "Please don't ask me to fly anywhere," Christy teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Jake laughed and held her tightly. "No worries, my love. If you ever need to fly, I'll be your wings."
Thanks for hanging out with me on today's episode, brother. I'm Jack, host of this podcast, and it's great having you here. If today's story hit home, send it on to a buddy who might need it. Remember, we're all in this together, turning life's curvy balls into wins. If you have an opinion or story to share, then drop a line in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out. Until next time, keep your chin up and keep pushing forward. Stay strong, folks.